You're listening to the Charles Aris podcast, How aerialPLOT is Turning Agricultural Data into Actionable Insights. In this episode, Charles Aris Senior Associate Practice Leader Nichole Hammond sits down with Jeremiah Roeth, founder and CEO of aerialPLOT, to discuss how practical, problem-first innovation is reshaping agricultural technology. Together, they explore aerialPLOT's journey from startup to scaling success, the evolution of drone and imagery-based field research, and why better data collection is critical to the future of agriculture. Let's dive in.
Hi, and welcome back to the Charles Aris podcast. My name is Nichole Hammond, and I'm a Senior Associate Practice Leader at Charles Aris, where I am part of our agriculture and food practice. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Jeremiah Roeth, the founder and CEO of aerialPLOT. Jeremiah, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about the conversation.
Thanks, Nichole. It's great to be here.
So today's podcast sits right at the intersection of technology, agriculture, and real-life problem solving. So we're going to take some time to explore how aerialPLOT is building practical AgTech solutions that are grounded in real-world problems, from its founding and Jeremiah's background to how customer needs shape product development and drive growth there. And then we're going to dig into the broader industry trends, like the evolution of private equity and VC investment in AgTech, the realities of today's valuation environment, and the role of AI as a tool in agriculture. And finally, we're going to look ahead to the future of farm-scale testing and how better data and more consistent methodologies can unlock more accurate, actionable insights. So, Jeremiah, talk to me about the premise of aerialPLOT, your background, and how you got started.
So I have a pretty non-traditional background for agriculture, and that really kind of ties into where this all came from. I started my career, left the farm, and I went off to get a PhD in molecular biology and then had a career in biotech. After that company went public, I came home to help my dad and sister run a contract research farm. And it was in that process of that humbling process of going from an IPO'd synthetic biology biotech to coming back to the home farm and running a research trials that I really started to see some opportunities in the industry for better data and better data systems. Really where the idea got really started is I was on a four-wheeler one day on one of our farms, and I was doing ratings on mature beans. So late in the season, sweating, it was, really hot and humid that day, and I'm trying to, with a clipboard, trying to take manual ratings on vigor in beans that were all up at my chest. And, when you're doing that and everything looks the same and you're struggling in the field, you start to question your life choices, maybe in some aspects, but really, saw that this is just not the way that we should be collecting data. There's a lot better ways to do that. I had a background in doing a lot of imagery in my previous life, and saw the opportunity to say we can put a drone up in the air and collect data for an entire farm of plots rather than doing it one by one with a subjective rating on a clipboard. I think the other part that I noticed when running the contract research farm is that there's a lot of opportunity to capture data throughout the season. And I'll talk about this kind of throughout this discussion, is that yield is obviously a very important metric for all product development. Now, that's the bottom line of where the farmer makes the money. With a lot of the newer classes of products, you have to have more insights about how a product works throughout the season, not just the final yield outcome. It's like trying to look at the end score of the sports game and understand who the most valuable player was and how they got there, right? And so the industry really struggles to capture that data in season, that early season emergence of the crop, that throughout periods of stress in the season, how did the crop respond, all the way to the end of the season. There's really been an absence of any sort of meaningful, scalable, non-subjective data that could be gathered systematically. And so that's really what drives a lot of what we've developed at aerialPLOT.
Well, and I know, Jeremiah, one of the things that you've talked about that's made aerialPLOT so successful is that you focus on the problem first, not creating a solution first. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And so again, going back to my days running, testing the family farm, interacting with clients, get hounded early on in season, wanting any sort of first glimpse of what's going on. And really that summarizes a lot of how field research trials are run. It's a bit of a black box. A lot of researchers, it's a sunk cost to have to run these R&D trials over multiple years. And that's a huge investment. And a lot of research will line up these trials, whether it be with a contract researcher or at the scale with a grower, line everything up, get everything in the ground. And then there's a black box of what's going on in the season. And so having to field these questions about, I want an early look, I want to know what's going on, really saw a lot of opportunity to be able to say, well, there's ways if we can automate this process, use subjective measurements, get them flowing into a cloud-based platform, then now we can create a system where there is a real-time data engine that's delivering data to these researchers, so you can be making and understanding what's going to happen at the end of the season when you do get that yield data from the combine.
So, Jeremiah, talk to me about the early days of the company and how your transition from where you were to where you are now. Where'd you get started?
When I first had the concept of putting a drone up to measure crop responses to enable better data for ag research, really my first business model that I built was kind of to build a software solution, right? And it was when I really approached it, it was really going to be a true SaaS offering. So build the software. There was at that time, this was about a decade ago, where a lot of people were buying drones and putting them up in the air. And so my initial thought was, okay, well, we've got people trying to do this. Let's give them a software solution that can help take that raw imagery and turn it into to data. What I learned quickly, though, was that the drone industry was there's a lot of messiness in that space, shall we say? A lot of hardware, a lot of software companies in the space, a lot of, shall we say, not so fully vetted solutions that were technically problematic to fly a drone. And it's a big difference between flying a drone as kind of like flying a little RGB drone that you might get from Costco or something and putting it up and doing a single flyover for a pretty picture. That's one way to fly a drone. That's not what we do at aerialPLOT, and that's not the system we built. We fly drones as a calibrated data collection sensor, right? And so what I failed to appreciate early on in the business is the importance of the ability to go out and execute a drone flight from the perspective of capturing data. And what I learned early on in the hard way is that in order for the business to have legs, and in order for the software solution to can push forward, you're dead in the water unless you don't have a good data collection source coming in. And so that's really when the idea for building out the flight services network came into play early on, which really helped propel the business.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience. My prior life in a contract research organization 10 years ago, we knew we needed drones because everybody had drones. We got drones and we learned how to fly them, and then we didn't know what to do with them. We got data that we just really didn't know what to do with. And so I know that you guys have stepped into that space and really helped navigate that.
Yeah, and I think the other big part to that is, I hear the term flyover, and when I was running Buckeye Ag, I'd say, hey, I have a drone. I've been building out some solutions on how to leverage that data. People are like, oh, that's great. Can you automate my stand count, or can you automate a single vigor rating? And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's absolutely something we do all day long at aerialPLOT. Those single time point measurements, we automate that collection with a drone. What no one was really doing was saying, okay, well, that's great, but that's just kind of taking a linear progression of what a human did and now automating it with a drone. What I realize is that if you approach this more systematically and say, well, you know what, it becomes really hard to try to hit this trial at this specific growth stage and hit that exact timing that you're looking for, because you think that's when you're going to see a product response. What if we took a step back and say, we have a system that can be automated? So now, instead of saying, I think this is the right time to fly, let's systematically fly it every week or every 2 weeks and capture a full time series of data. And now, instead of a single isolated data point that tells just a limited part of the story, we have a complete digital archive of everything that happened in that crop throughout the entire season. And so that's really what enables you to go from kind of that linear progression of, I used to do it this way, now I get another single data point that's partial, to now I have a more complete holistic picture of how to model what my crop is doing in the field, and being able to kind of answer some of these questions that really drive ultimately product performance decisions. I found early on that those single one-offs were okay and they gave good data, but they really didn't move the needle the way it needed to be moved. And when you started to look at this full season data set, so you now model growth curves and model and extract more high resolution values, like what happened in the crop from the time it came out of the ground till it flowered. Can I take all that data and have a cumulative assessment that says this is how the whole emergent time frame of the crop performed? That really allowed to ask more interesting questions and also better characterize products.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and can you talk to me a little bit about your customer base? Who are you working with?
So we don't work with farmers. That's one thing that we're very, very appreciative of the challenges of farming, and we're not a company, one of these ag tech companies that's trying to build a tech solution and go to the farmer with yet another login, with yet another dashboard, with yet another kind of tech solution that they need to subscribe to. We want to work with the companies that are building the products to market to farmers. And so we work with input companies that can be anything from from breeders looking at different genetics to any sort of input companies around fertilizer, crop protection, biologicals, you name it. If it's a product that a farmer might use, we want to enable those companies to have better R&D data from early stage discovery all the way through to launch into the commercial space, so that when it does reach the hands of a farmer, that product has now been characterized with really rich data sets, and we now can understand where it's going to perform and where it's not going to perform.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, and talk to me a little bit about how you scaled from those early days. You are a success story of a startup that managed to grow, not too slow, not too fast, hit that sweet spot. How did you manage that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Really, what I learned from my career in biotech, again, I joined early on in a synthetic biology company when there was about 20 people. I was there about 8 years and kind of rode up the growth ladder to where that company IPO'd and went public. And that was a venture capital funded company. And I saw kind of what that whole process looked like. When I knew that I had this concept and there was an opportunity to build the technology for aerialPLOT, I really wanted to take those experience of the things that I saw working, but also be in control of my own destiny and be able to make the choices and have that choice on how the business is run be directly tied to a business model that I was in control of and was tied directly to revenue early on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. So who were your investors? How did you get started? What was your experience there?
Just founded the company in 2018. It was me and a dream and some initial, but it was also really multiple years of kind of creating imagery, prototyping software. I had some previous colleagues from my previous life build some prototype software for me. So I really was tinkering for quite a bit all the time while running Buckeye Ag Testing, and then starting to sell that imagery data through Buckeye Ag Testing to clients. And that really provided a foundation for what is the value proposition of the industry? How can it be practically integrated into a research program, and really kind of work through some of those challenges. So it wasn't this new tech that was kind of out of place and wasn't able to be integrated in a real world research program. And so when I started in 2018, had this foundation of how to integrate aerial data into a small plot research program. So I did that for a while, I built some of that, and then in 2019, I knew that I needed more software horsepower because I was generating a lot of data. I had this little prototype software that I was using, but it was a lot of manual mouse clicks and processing of the data. And importantly, I knew that I needed to build a cloud engine. This data could not live, you're talking about imagery, you're talking about extracted metrics, time series, a lot of data, right? And so knew I needed a software solution. So really throughout that time was building out the data model, building out kind of the overarching, scheme of what a software solution would look like. And then in 2019, I approached through a family connection, approached a software engineering firm based here in Ohio called Roeth. Made the pitch. They were operating in industrial automation in a lot of different verticals, but did not have any presence in the ag vertical space and were interested in it. And I made the pitch about what I was doing and where the market opportunity was, and they decided to make an initial equity investment. The really great thing about that is when you go to more of kind of that private equity kind of approach, they allowed me to make a lot of decisions and kind of steer the path, which was great because I still was running Buckeye Ag at the time. So I did double duty for a little while. So really keeping in touch with that. Part of the equity investment, they provided about 18 months of runway with a software team that they had internally built. So I immediately got a team that had already been working together. So I didn't have to go out and hire a bunch of people.
Nice.
Was able to kind of have that core team focus 100% on building the solution. And that really allowed us to, in a very short period of time, with the background work that I had done to build out kind of the model and the plan, and then have a good team, was able in less than a year, was able to design, build, and launch a software platform. And we did that in late 2019, early 2020, right around COVID. And that's when the SaaS model was the primary approach. So had a season where I was able to kind of have that runway to test the waters of the software, optimize it, and then really kind of had that critical. It was around mid 2020 when I realized that the SaaS model was not going to work, and now I still had some runway left to now. Okay, now let's integrate a drone service offering, and let's build out the actual drone flight network part of this so that it's more of a turnkey solution. So I'm not going to the contract researcher and say, hey, fly your drones on your existing trials. I'm now going to the input companies and saying, hey, do you want your entire research program imaged and that data flowing through an engine into a cloud platform that you can tie to your internal data scientists? that was really what unlocked that kind of business model that served as the foundation for growth from 2021 onward. And so again, I have to acknowledge my colleague Gary Nijak. He told me that the SaaS model was not going to work for the exact reasons why it didn't work. And so I called him up in the middle of summer in 2020, and he was doing some landscaping in Indiana. And I said, "Look, you're right. This didn't work." And he's like, "Also, you're going to need if people are going to really integrate this, they need to be able to get consistent data across their entire research program. So you're going to need to think about how do you scale this across the Corn Belt." And so I was at that point hired him as a consultant, and then I said, "Come on board and help me figure out how to scale this and make this a true offering and a true business model that had the legs to generate revenue so that we could grow the business and bootstrap from there on."
Right. Right. And so, that foundation that you described where you're building these solutions around the real problems that you're seeing and prioritizing, usable outcomes and simple user-friendly solutions, that feels kind of like a lens for the broader ag tech community and market. And so, I'm wondering from your perspective, how well do you think today's ag tech investment landscape actually aligns with that philosophy? Are investors getting better at backing these practical problems first solutions, or is there still a gap there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that if we look at just the kind of the past few years, I mean, a lot of people can say, well, it's been a rough economy. The ag economy has been hit by a number of factors. And you can make the excuse that say that that's why there's been a lot of the tech companies that have fallen off the market. I think that's certainly part of it. But I also think that, a big part of it is, you've got to be able to integrate the science, the business, and the tech, right? And so the science, the agronomy, like the practical kind of knowledge of what kind of data do you need as an agronomist? What are the kind of things that drive that? So often I see a lot of the tech companies will build out a really cool technology solution that proposes an offering to meet needs, but they're not necessarily close enough to really truly understand what those needs are, what the questions that should be asked. And I think importantly, this is how a person's asking that question now. How do you implement technology that enables to answer that question and then take it a step further? And to do that, you really have to have people in the tech company that understand the agronomy, understand, how the software and the technology can be integrated. One thing I like to say, and I've been kind of in a mantra, is you have to meet the industry where they're at, right? A lot of tech companies go to a farmer and say, "Here's your solution, now adopt it," right? If you don't meet them where they're at, the adoption is going to be really, really difficult. And so I think bridging that integration point is key. And importantly, just understanding the business model. What's your value proposition? What's going to make this, company going to continue to invest in your solution?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a part of storytelling is important too. And, making sure that investors understand the landscape that they're investing in. And I think we're seeing some private equity firms kind of self-selecting out of this market, which is maybe good because they were expecting quicker returns that didn't take into account the realities that we face in agriculture, the growing season, the regulatory requirements, all of those kinds of things. I think, from our perspective, we're seeing smarter investing from groups that have the patience and more of an understanding of the market. To give some context and color, can you talk a little bit about aerialPLOT's early investment and how you've successfully now continued to scale that business from there?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. I think, like you're referring to ag, it's a more of a long game, right? You're not going to get a quick turnaround. It's not, whether it's tech or product development, it's not going to turn around in a year or even 2 years. You've got to think about what it's going to take to get this a truly successful offering to the market, and that takes time. And so, yeah, I think that as far as initial investments in that, the ability to kind of have that runway, build the solution, and the other thing I will say is that from early on, from running a research farm, we're one of the few AgTech companies that we run our own research trials. We have our own internal trials that we design, we put out, and then we use our technology stack to characterize our own product, right? And so we have longstanding kind of collaborations with certainly Buckeye Ag Testing, my home farm. We also work with a lot of academics early on, University of Illinois, the Belo Group, working with Carl Bradley at University of Kentucky, working with Ryan Budnick at Iowa Crop. We have multi-year investments in where we're taking our limited revenue and funneling that back in as an investment so that we're a user of our own platform, and that allows us really to say, well, here's what it's doing now. Here's the data I have. What's the next phase of development look like? If I want to get from here to there, and use this for some really, really high value agribusiness management decisions. What are the missing pieces of data? What's the next evolution of this technology that's going to solve that gap in the industry to leverage this data?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that kind of leads a little bit into AI, which is always a hot topic. And it seems like everybody has the questions, but nobody has the answer yet. And so curious how you're approaching AI in aerialPLOT specifically and how you see it working in the broader industry.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, if you're going to use AI, especially around data science and modeling, fundamental currency of that is high quality, objective, assured um, data. And if you don't have an engine to generate that kind of data to train a model or to build kind of a tool around, your tool is, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's an overused saying, but there's a lot of truth to it, right? And so I think that what we've built here is by offering, again, this service model, which to go out and get the data and have a very structured, we've invested heavily on automating that process so that we can take and we can hire any agronomy bachelor's graduate and put a drone in their hand, and within a week or so, we've got them trained on our process so they can fly a drone, take the data off that drone, and automate a lot of the downstream post-processing into our cloud platform. And so the ability to kind of set up that engine really, I think, sets the stage for really leveraging AI, whether it be kind of using these extracted time series to build growth curve models to understand crop dynamics throughout the season, or whether that's generating images that can be used to train a computer vision model to recognize certain aspects of a plant as a way to automate kind of phenotyping and other characteristics. You got to build a process that you can reliably get that data to and get it in a format that's quality controlled, that's verified, and importantly, that's structured into a robust platform. So now you really can leverage these tools.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that it's exciting days for aerialPLOT right now with, I know you are looking at farm scale testing and growing in there, and also, have partnered with Grand Farm and have a new location in North Dakota. So talk to me about some of the exciting things that are happening right now.
Yeah, it's great. It's busy days at this point. We've been looking for a new home for a while now. We knew we wanted to be a little bit more closer to the central Midwest. But as a bootstrap kind of company growing on revenue, we wanted to go somewhere where there was a good ecosystem, where again we were partners we could collaborate with, form good, solid business relationships. That we have this established kind of business model that we know is working in the industry. So how do we partner with people that are going to get us to the next stage? In looking at a lot of places, we took a look at the Fargo area in North Dakota and worked with some of the folks there at the Economic Development Council there, and saw that there was a lot to offer, not only from an ecosystem of other like-minded tech companies and ag companies in general, but also the state of North Dakota had a lot of really, really strong kind of incentive programs for businesses that are trying to really make a difference in the commercial UAV space, as well as agriculture, as well as the digital ag tech space. And so it just became a natural fit the more that we learned about it. And so we're excited to be moving headquarters up to Fargo. We're also, it seems like we're moving northward here. We have expanding into Canada this year. So opening up our Canada business and hiring drone pilots up there to offer services for field research up in Canada. So a lot of exciting stuff. And, as you're growing a business straight based on revenue, again, you take the pulse of the industry, where are the needs coming from, and you follow that, and you vet it, and that's what we've done, and I'm excited to have some of these growth opportunities.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. That's awesome. Well, Jeremiah, I know you got your roots in, small scale field trials, but I know you are also, expanding into farm scale studies. So talk to me a little bit about what you're doing there.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been a natural progression for us. We've built this kind of engine for small plot research. And what that did was allow us to have a software platform that centers everything around plots, which are geospatial units. As we work with more and more companies, we started to see the challenge of going from a very controlled small plot research data set into going now on farm trials, where you don't have the luxury of everything's perfectly designed and replicated, random complete blocks. And so we've been pulled in that space early on. And so it was around 2020, late 2021, early 2022 that we started to see that need. So we again started to run our own R&D trials and do farm scale trials back in 2022 and did multi-year trials. And I should also mention, when we talk about good collaborations, we also did it in row crops on a home farm at Buckeye and some adjacent farmers, but also doing it in permanent crops out on the West Coast, working with folks like Alan Fetters with Ag Acceleration, and David Holden, and looking at these kind of larger field scale needs. And so that really, when we get into that space, we saw that there were a lot of people that were running those trials that they were missing pieces of the data. Now, they're missing that temporal aspect of it, but also missing that geospatial context of the advantage of moving to a field scale is that you're simultaneously testing lots of different environments in the field. But if you really want to truly understand performance of your product in those environments, you have to decouple your product performance from the overall field variability. And so we really started building these tools around the geospatial mapping of a field that you're doing a test on. And we can get that from things like historical satellite data, soil data, other parameters that we can pull in, integrate those data layers together, couple that to our full season imagery as well as the yield data from the combine. And now we have a platform that can not only answer does the product work, but where does it work? How well does it work in each of these environments? What are the factors that are driving how well it works? We're excited just this week. We actually launched a new dashboard in our software that we call GeoMFA or Geospatial Multi-Factor Analytics. That's a very kind of as a mouthful, but really it does, it does the job of integrating all this data together. So when you're looking at performance, you can truly understand the factors that are driving either success or failure of a product. And I think that's one thing that is not always fully understood or fully appreciated is for some of these newer classes of products like biologicals and other things, they don't work everywhere. There are some places where that product may not work. And if you're going to take that to market and put it in a farmer's hand as a product development company, you really should kind of have a good understanding of where am I going to get an ROI and where might a farmer not get an ROI. And that's almost as equally important.
It definitely is to be able to share that so that it is, applied correctly and that the product is delivering in the way that it should. It has to have the right conditions. So that's great. So like how big are we talking with these farm scale trials?
Yeah, we can go pretty large with satellite imagery. One thing that we really like to do with this is use a drone satellite fusion approach. And it's hard, it's really expensive to put a drone up and, for example, fly a couple 100-acre field and fly it every week throughout the season. That's cost prohibitive, right? But can we take a drone out, put that drone up and fly it maybe once early in the season to make sure that that field has uniform establishment, maybe flag areas where there might be a poor stand or poor weed control or some sort of tillage effects and be able to use that drone image as a way to get a good measurement as well as do quality control on the overall field. We could do the same thing at the end of the season and look at that late season. Was there a wind event that took down half the corn? Or was there a patch in the field that, had a problem late in the season? So since you can't fly the drone, we do it at these very strategic times and then supplement the rest of the season with satellite data. And that allows us to get the best of both worlds. We can get, true geospatial mapping with that high resolution data and get the scale that you can get from broad acreage satellite imagery. Super excited about that. But to answer your question, our typical size of some of these field scale trials is anywhere from about 20 to 30 to about 200 acres. Large enough to get a nice field spread, but not too big that it's hard to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those insights are so important. So that's fantastic work that you're doing. Awesome. Well, Jeremiah, any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really driven our success, and I've touched on it a couple times, is that we're unique in the fact that my background and my colleague Gary's background. I mean, I'm a molecular biologist by training. He's a chemical engineer by training. We both kind of have spent time investing in understanding the agronomy and kind of worked in the space enough to understand the needs. And so I think keeping really close. Bringing that multidisciplinary approach and being able to embrace technology and understand how to integrate technology has been key. To hire a team that is smarter than you and can to do things, see the vision and get aligned on what you're trying to do and build the right kinds of tools has been key. But when we've been doing this and growing this and in the way that we have, I don't have a big stack of money sitting around that I can afford to waste efforts on, chasing any butterfly that flies by. We have to stay very laser focused on what our value proposition is to our clients, because if they don't see an ROI, they're not gonna sign up for the contract the next year. So I think that while being revenue driven can be very difficult, it keeps you so in touch with the product you're building and ultimately the business that you're building, because a lot of AgTech companies, they start with the tech first and then try to figure out the business model at the end, and that snowballs into you may have a really good tech solution. But if at the end of the day, it's not going to generate enough revenue to sustain your business when the money runs out, you're dead in the water. And so I think that, the way we've done it, it certainly hasn't been perfect, and it certainly hasn't been without struggles. And there's certainly things that I would love to do that I don't have the money to do. But that laser focus that comes along with being revenue driven has really allowed us to stay really laser focused on delivering value.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Solving the problems as they exist, making the tools to meet the problem. I think it's unique sometimes in the world. So that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, Jeremiah, thanks so much for the thoughtful and insightful conversation today. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. I hope you'll join us next time on the Charles Aris Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Charles Aris Podcast. For more insights and resources, visit us at www.charlesaris.com. We'll see you next time.